The night was heavy with silence. A cold wind moved across the empty rail lines, carrying with it the metallic scent of iron and oil. The sky above was a dull gray, clouds pressing down as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan Cole gripped the control lever of the maintenance trolley, his eyes scanning the track ahead. It was supposed to be a routine shift, just another late-night inspection run. No passengers, no pressure, no surprises. At least, that's what he thought. The speed indicator flickered. 60 miles per hour. Ethan frowned. That's not right. He pulled back gently on the brake. Nothing happened. He frowned deeper and applied more pressure. Still nothing. A thin line of tension crept into his jaw. Come on. He pressed harder. The lever resisted him completely. The trolley didn't slow. Instead, it surged forward slightly, as if mocking his attempt to control it. Ethan's heartbeat began to rise. No, 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 no. He slammed the emergency brake. Dead. Unresponsive. The realization hit him like a punch to the chest. The brakes were gone. The trolley was now nothing more than a steel projectile hurtling down the track. Ethan's breath became shallow. His fingers tightened around the controls as his eyes snapped forward. And then he saw them. 5 figures. Workers. They were scattered across the track ahead, bent over their tools, completely unaware of what was coming toward them. Ethan's stomach dropped. Oh God. He slammed his hand onto the horn. The sound ripped through the night, loud, desperate, continuous. But the wind carried it away. The workers didn't react. They didn't look up. They didn't move. They had no idea. Ethan's mind raced. Distance shrinking. Speed constant. Time, almost gone. Then, he saw it. To the right. A side track. A narrow diverging rail that split off just ahead. Hope. But only for a second. Because at the end of that track, there was a single worker. One man. Standing alone. Ethan's grip tightened. His eyes darted between the 2 paths. Straight ahead, 5 lives. Turn right, 1 life. His throat went dry. No. The trolley thundered forward. His mind screamed for clarity, for guidance, for anything, but all he found was chaos. He could do nothing. Or he could choose. And choosing meant responsibility. Choosing meant guilt. Choosing meant blood on his hands. The seconds stretched into something unbearable. He imagined the impact, 5 bodies crushed under steel. Then he imagined the other track, 1 man, unaware, sacrificed. A voice in his head whispered. 5 is more than 1. Another voice answered. But 1 is still someone. Ethan closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them again, he made his decision. He pulled the switch. The trolley jolted violently as it shifted onto the side track. Metal screamed against metal. The sudden turn nearly threw Ethan off balance, but he held on. Then, impact. A dull, sickening sound. And then silence. The trolley rolled forward a few more feet before coming to a slow, grinding stop. Ethan didn't move. He couldn't. His hands were still locked around the controls, his knuckles pale. The world felt distant, muted, like he was underwater. Finally, slowly, he forced himself to look ahead. There was a body on the track. Still, broken, alone. Ethan staggered out of the trolley. Each step felt unreal, disconnected from his body. He approached the man. The worker's helmet had rolled a few feet away. His eyes were open, empty. Ethan stopped breathing. I didn't. His voice cracked. I had to. But the words felt hollow. Meaningless. Because the truth was simple. He had chosen. The investigation began before dawn. Police lights painted the night in flashes of red and blue. Voices overlapped. Questions came from every direction. What happened? Why? Didn't you stop? Did you see the workers? Ethan answered them all, mechanically, without emotion. The brakes failed. There were 5 on the main track. 1 on the side track. I turned. The officers exchanged glances. One of them nodded slowly. You saved 5 lives. Saved. The word echoed strangely in Ethan's mind. Saved. At what cost? By morning, the story had spread. News outlets picked it up almost instantly. Driver makes split-second decision, saves 5 workers. Heroic choice prevents greater tragedy. 1 life lost, 5 spared. People praised him. Strangers called him brave. Some even called him a hero. But Ethan didn't feel like a hero. Not when he closed his eyes. Because every time he did, he saw the man, standing on that side track, unaware, trusting the world to be normal for just a few more seconds. Seconds that Ethan took away. The trial was quick, too quick. The court ruled it an unavoidable accident. A tragic but necessary decision. The judge said, given the circumstances, the defendant acted to minimize loss of life. This court finds no criminal liability. No criminal liability. Ethan walked free, but something inside him didn't. Weeks passed, then months. Ethan left his job. He couldn't bring himself to go near the tracks again. He tried to move on. Tried to forget. But forgetting wasn't an option. Every quiet moment became dangerous. Every silence filled with memory. He started avoiding people, avoiding mirrors, avoiding himself. One evening, unable to bear the walls of his apartment any longer, Ethan went out for a walk. He didn't plan where to go. His feet carried him aimlessly through the city until he found himself standing on a bridge. Below him, railway tracks stretched into the distance. Ethan froze. His chest tightened. No, but he didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer to the railing. Looked down. The tracks were empty, still, safe. For now. He let out a slow breath. Then, a sound, faint at first, then growing louder. A train. Ethan looked up. In the distance, a trolley was approaching fast. Too fast. Something was wrong. His body tensed instinctively. Then he saw them. 5 workers. On the track. Again. His heart slammed against his ribs. No, not again. He looked for the driver. But something felt off. The train wasn't slowing. The horn wasn't sounding. It was the same. The exact same situation. But this time, he wasn't the driver. He was just a man on a bridge. A witness. Helpless. Or was he? He turned his head, and saw him. A large man stood next to him, leaning casually over the railing, watching the track below. Completely unaware, Ethan's breath caught. A thought formed. Unwanted, uninvited, but undeniable. If he pushed him, the man would fall onto the track. The train would hit him. It would stop. The 5 workers would live. Ethan stepped back. No, his hands trembled. This isn't the same. But his mind argued. 5 lives. 1 life. Again, the same equation. But this time, no lever, no switch, no machine. Just his hands. And a choice. Ethan looked at the man. He was humming softly. At peace. Alive. Ethan's chest tightened painfully. I can't. But the train was getting closer. Seconds. Just seconds. The workers still hadn't noticed. The man beside him shifted slightly, adjusting his stance. Still unaware. Still safe. Unless Ethan changed that. Ethan's heart pounded in his ears. He stepped closer. Then stopped. His hands hovered in the air. Shaking. He remembered the first time. The justification. The logic. The numbers. And then, the face. The lifeless eyes. The silence after. His hands dropped. I can't do it. The train roared closer. The moment passed. And then, screams echoed from below. Ethan closed his eyes. He didn't need to look. He already knew. The screams didn't stop immediately. They echoed, then faded, then dissolved into a terrible silence that felt heavier than the noise itself. Ethan stood frozen on the bridge, his hands gripping the cold metal railing so tightly his fingers began to ache. He still hadn't looked down. He couldn't. He didn't need to. He already knew what he would see. 5 bodies. 5 lives ended in seconds. Because he had done nothing. A voice inside him whispered. You could have stopped it. Another answered. By becoming a killer again. His breathing grew uneven. I didn't choose this, he muttered. But the truth pressed harder. You did choose. You chose not to act. Ethan finally forced himself to look down. The sight shattered whatever fragile control he had left. Workers lay scattered across the track. Tools were thrown aside. The trolley had come to a stop further down, its metal frame dented and streaked with red. The world blurred. Ethan stepped back from the railing, shaking his head. No, no. Behind him, the man he had almost pushed stood completely unaware of how close he had come to death. Ethan looked at him, really looked this time. A normal man, breathing, living. Because Ethan had spared him. Or failed the others. He didn't know anymore. The news broke faster this time. 5 workers killed in runaway trolley incident. Witness present but unable to intervene. Could more have been done? Ethan avoided the headlines. But he couldn't avoid the questions. Because they weren't just coming from the media. They were coming from inside his own mind. The police found him within hours. Witnesses had seen him on the bridge. They brought him in, not as a suspect, but as someone who might explain what happened. "What did you see?" the officer asked. Ethan stared at the table. "The brakes failed. And you were on the bridge." "Yes." "Was there anything you could have done?" The question hung in the air. Ethan's throat tightened. He hesitated, then said quietly, "No." But even as the word left his mouth, he knew it wasn't entirely true. Days turned into weeks. But this time, the weight was different. Before, he had acted, and lived with the guilt of action. Now, he had not acted, and lived with the guilt of inaction. And somehow, it felt worse. Ethan stopped sleeping properly. When he did sleep, the dreams came. But they weren't the same. Sometimes he saw the first man, the one he had killed. Other times he saw the 5 workers from the bridge. And sometimes, he saw both, standing together, watching him, waiting for an answer he couldn't give. One afternoon, unable to bear the isolation any longer, Ethan found himself sitting in a quiet office. Across from him sat Drive. Lena Hart, a specialist in trauma and ethical decision-making. She studied him calmly. "You've been through 2 extreme situations," she said gently. "Most people never face even one." Ethan let out a hollow laugh. "Lucky me." She didn't react. Instead, she asked, "Do you think you made the right choice the first time?" Ethan hesitated. "I saved 5 people. That's not what I asked." He looked up at her. For a moment, he didn't have an answer. Finally, he said, "I don't know." "And the second time?" His voice dropped. "I let 5 people die." "Did you?" Ethan frowned. "I was there. I could have done something." "What, exactly?" He didn't answer. "Because saying it out loud would make it real. You're holding yourself responsible for both outcomes," she continued. "But they're fundamentally different." "How?" Ethan snapped. "In both cases, people died because of me. In the first case, you acted. In the second, you refrained. That doesn't change the result." "No," she said calmly. "But it changes the nature of your responsibility." Ethan leaned back, frustrated. "It's all the same. 1 life. 5 lives, it's just numbers." "Is it?" she asked. He hesitated again. Because deep down, he knew it wasn't. A week later, Ethan received a letter. Official. Stamped. He opened it with trembling hands. It was a summons. A public inquiry had been launched into the second incident. And they wanted him to testify. The courtroom was packed. Media, observers, legal experts, all waiting. Ethan sat in the witness chair, the weight of countless eyes pressing down on him. The prosecutor approached. "Mr. Cole," he began, "you were present on the bridge at the time of the incident." "Yes." "And you were aware that the trolley was going to hit the workers?" "Yes." "Did you consider any way to stop it?" Ethan swallowed. "Yes." The room shifted slightly. "What did you consider?" Ethan hesitated, then said it. "There was a man next to me. I thought, if I pushed him onto the track, the trolley might stop." A murmur spread through the courtroom. "And why didn't you?" Ethan's voice was barely audible. "Because I couldn't. Couldn't, or wouldn't." Ethan looked up. Their eyes met. "I wouldn't." The prosecutor nodded slowly. "So you made a conscious decision not to act?" "Yes. And as a result, 5 people died." The words landed heavily. "Yes." The prosecutor stepped back. No further questions. The defense attorney approached next. "Mr. Cole," she said, "did the man on the bridge pose any threat to those workers?" "No." "Was he involved in the situation in any way?" "No." "So the only way he would have died is if you had pushed him?" Ethan's chest tightened. "Yes." "Which would have been a direct action taken by you?" "Yes." She nodded. "Thank you." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Cole," he said, "you faced 2 situations. In the first, you chose to act, resulting in 1 death. In the second, you chose not to act, resulting in 5 deaths." Ethan remained silent. The judge continued. "Do you believe one decision was more moral than the other?" The question cut deeper than anything else. Ethan took a long breath. "I think," he began slowly, "the first time, I chose who would die." He paused. The second time, I refused to choose. And which feels worse? Ethan's eyes lowered. The second. A ripple moved through the room. After the hearing, Ethan stepped outside into the cold air. Reporters shouted questions. Do you regret your decisions? Would you do anything differently? Do you think you're responsible? He didn't answer. He just walked. That night, Ethan sat alone in his apartment. The city lights flickered through the window. His mind replayed everything. The tracks, the faces, the choices, or the refusal to choose. A thought surfaced. Clear, sharp, unavoidable. There was no escaping responsibility. Whether he acted, or didn't act, the weight remained. Days later, Drive. Hart said something that stayed with him. You're searching for a perfect answer, she told him. But moral decisions aren't about perfection. They're about what you're willing to live with. Ethan stared at her. And what if I can't live with any of it? She didn't answer immediately. Then she said quietly, then the real question isn't what's right. He frowned. What is it? She met his eyes. Who do you choose to become? That question followed him everywhere. Into his thoughts. Into his dreams. Into every quiet moment. Because now, he knew something he hadn't understood before. It wasn't just about saving lives. It wasn't just about numbers. It was about identity, about the line between being someone who allows harm, and someone who causes it. And deep down, Ethan still didn't know which side he stood on. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. Ethan hadn't planned to come here. But somehow, after everything, the bridge, the trial, the endless questioning, his steps had led him to this place. Maybe because, deep down, he was still searching. Not for answers, but for something that felt certain. Inside the emergency wing, chaos moved with purpose. Doctors rushed. Machines beeped. Voices overlapped. Life and death existed side by side, separated only by decisions. Ethan stood near the entrance, unsure why he hadn't turned back. Then he heard it. Doctor. Malik, we're losing him. A sharp urgency in the voice cut through the noise. Ethan turned. A team surrounded a stretcher. A man lay on it, pale, barely conscious, blood soaking through layers of bandages. Another doctor moved beside them, calm, focused, controlled. Dr. Amir Malik. Ethan didn't know him, but something about the way he carried himself made it clear. This was someone who made decisions under pressure. Every day. Hours later, Ethan found himself sitting across from him. He didn't remember how the conversation started. Maybe it was the way Drive. Malik noticed his silence, or the way Ethan couldn't stop staring at the doors behind which lives were being decided. You've seen something like this before, Drive. Malik said. It wasn't a question. Ethan nodded slowly. I had to choose, who lives. Doctor. Malik studied him carefully. And you're still living with it. Yes. A pause. Then Ethan asked, how do you do it? Do what? Decide. Doctor. Malik leaned back slightly. We don't always decide, he said. Sometimes, we prioritize. Ethan frowned. That sounds like the same thing. It isn't. Doctor. Malik gestured toward the emergency ward. Let me give you a situation, he said. 6 patients come in after an accident. 5 have moderate injuries, they'll survive if treated in time. 1 is critical, severe internal damage. Saving him would take all available time and resources. Ethan's chest tightened slightly. He already knew where this was going. What do you do, doctor? Malik asked. Ethan answered quietly, you save the 5. Yes. And the 1, doctor. Malik didn't hesitate. He dies. The words landed cleanly, without apology. Ethan looked away. That sounds cold. It sounds necessary, Drive. Malik corrected. Ethan shook his head. It still feels like choosing who dies. Doctor. Malik nodded. In a way, it is. Silence settled between them. Then Drive. Malik leaned forward slightly. But here's the real question, he said. Would you actively kill 1 person to save 5? Ethan's eyes snapped back to him. What do you mean, doctor? Malik's voice remained calm. Imagine 5 patients in need of organ transplants. Heart, liver, kidneys, lungs. They will all die without them. Ethan felt a slow tension build in his chest. And there's no donor, he asked. No donor, Drive. Malik confirmed. A pause. Then he continued. But in the next room, there's a healthy man. Routine checkup. Perfect match for all 5. Ethan's stomach dropped. No, you could take his organs, drive. Malik said evenly. 5 lives saved, 1 life lost. Ethan stood up abruptly. That's murder, is it, doctor? Malik asked. Yes. Why? Ethan stared at him, almost angry. Because you're killing him. And the 5, doctor. Malik pressed. What about them? Ethan hesitated. They die. So in one case, you let 5 die. In the other, you kill 1 to save 5. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. It's not the same. Why not? Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. Because the answer wasn't as simple as it should have been. They're both deaths, drive. Malik said. But they feel different, don't they? Yes. Why? Ethan struggled. Because, in one, you're directly responsible. And in the other, you're not. Doctor. Malik's eyes held his. Are you sure about that? The question hit deeper than Ethan expected. Because suddenly, he wasn't thinking about the hospital anymore. He was back on the bridge. Back at the tracks. Back at the moment he chose not to act. I was there, Ethan said slowly. I could have stopped it. But you didn't kill them, drive. Malik replied. Ethan's voice tightened. I could have saved them. And at what cost? Ethan didn't answer. Because he already knew. Doctor. Malik continued, softer now. There's a line most people won't cross, he said. Not because of numbers, but because of what it means to cross it. Ethan sat back down slowly. That line is killing someone directly. Yes. Ethan stared at the floor. I crossed it once. Doctor. Malik didn't respond immediately. Then he asked, did you? Ethan looked up, confused. I turned the track, he said. I knew what would happen. You redirected harm, drive. Malik said. You didn't create it. Ethan frowned. That sounds like an excuse. It's a distinction, drive. Malik corrected. Does it really matter? Doctor. Malik held his gaze. It matters to you. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep again. But this time, the thoughts were different. Sharper. More focused. Less chaotic. He replayed the 3 situations. The trolley. The bridge. The hospital. In each one, the numbers were the same. 5 lives. 1 life. But his reactions were different. Why? He whispered the possibilities into the dark. In the first, I chose the smaller loss. In the second, I refused to become the cause. In the third, I know I would never do it. The realization settled slowly. It wasn't just about outcomes. It was about actions. About intention. About crossing a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Days later, the inquiry reached its conclusion. Ethan stood in the courtroom once more. The judge spoke clearly. In the first incident, the defendant acted under mechanical failure to minimize loss of life. In the second, he was under no legal obligation to intervene. A pause. Therefore, this court finds no grounds for liability in either case. No liability. Again, Ethan felt nothing. No relief. No closure. Just emptiness. Outside, drive. Hart approached him. It's over, she said. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, he replied. It's not. She studied him. What's still unresolved? Ethan looked out at the city. At the people walking by. Living their lives. Unaware of the questions that had consumed him. I still don't know what the right thing is. Doctor. Hart nodded. That's because there may not be a single right answer. Ethan let out a slow breath. Then what am I supposed to do with all this? She gave a small, understanding smile. You live with it. Ethan looked at her. That's it. That's it. Weeks passed. Life slowly began to return to something resembling normal. But Ethan was no longer the same. He noticed things differently. Small decisions felt heavier. Simple choices carried unseen weight. Because now he understood something most people never had to face. Every decision shapes who you are. One evening, as he walked past the railway tracks again, he stopped. Not out of fear, but out of reflection. He looked down the long stretch of steel disappearing into the distance. Then he whispered to himself. It was never just about saving lives. A pause. It was about what I was willing to become. And for the first time, he wasn't running from the answer. Winter came quietly. The city slowed under a pale gray sky, and the air carried a stillness that felt almost deliberate, as if the world itself had softened its pace. Ethan noticed it. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. Months had passed since the inquiry, since the hospital, since the questions that had once consumed him completely. The noise in his mind hadn't disappeared, but it had settled. Not into silence, but into something more honest. He no longer tried to escape it. Instead, he carried it. One morning, Ethan found himself back where everything had begun. The railway yard. The same cold metal tracks. The same endless lines stretching into the distance. For a long moment, he simply stood there. Breathing, remembering. He hadn't come here by accident. He had come to face it. All of it. A voice behind him broke the silence. "You used to work here, didn't you?" Ethan turned. An older man stood a few steps away, wearing a maintenance jacket, his hands tucked into his pockets. Ethan nodded. "Yeah." The man glanced down the track. "Hard job." Ethan gave a faint smile. "Harder than it looks." The man studied him briefly, as if sensing something beneath the surface. Then he said, "You ever have to make one of those decisions?" Ethan hesitated, then answered quietly, "Yes." The man didn't ask for details. He just nodded slowly. "Funny thing about choices," he said. "People think it's about right and wrong." Ethan looked at him. "What is it about, then?" The man shrugged slightly. "What you can live with." Ethan felt the words settle into him. Not new, but clearer now. Later that day, Ethan visited the memorial site. It had been set up near the track where the second incident had happened. 5 names engraved on a simple stone. No headlines, no debates, just names, lives. He stood there for a long time. Not speaking, not moving, just present. "I didn't save you." The words came quietly. "I know that." A pause. "I don't know if I could have." Another pause. "But I know I didn't try." He closed his eyes briefly. The wind moved gently around him. For a moment, it felt like the world was listening. "I used to think there was a right answer," he continued softly. "A way to make it all make sense." He shook his head. "But there isn't." Silence. "Then, there's just what we choose." When Ethan opened his eyes again, something inside him felt different. Not lighter, but steadier. That evening, he met Drive. Hart one last time. They sat across from each other in the same quiet office. "You look different," she said. "I feel different." "In what way?" Ethan thought for a moment. "I stopped trying to solve it." She smiled slightly. "That's usually when people start understanding it." Ethan leaned back. "For a long time, I kept asking what the right decision was. And now," he looked at her, "now I think the question was wrong." She raised an eyebrow. "What's the right question?" Ethan answered slowly. "Not, what should I do?" Ellipsis quote. A pause. "But, what kind of person do I want to be?" Doctor. Hart nodded. "That's a harder question." "Yeah," Ethan said. "But it's the only one that makes sense now." Days turned into weeks. And for the first time since everything had happened, Ethan began to move forward. Not by forgetting, but by accepting. He took a new job. Not on the tracks, but close enough to remind him. He began working with a safety oversight team, reviewing systems, protocols, looking for ways to prevent failures before they happened. Before choices like his ever became necessary. One afternoon, during a routine inspection, a junior technician approached him. "Hey," the young man said, slightly unsure. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan nodded. "If you had to choose, like, between saving 5 people or 1, what would you do?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked out over the tracks. Then back at the technician. "You're asking the wrong question," he said. The technician frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Ethan took a slow breath. "The question isn't just about numbers." "Then what is it about?" Ethan met his eyes. "It's about responsibility." A pause. "And about who you become after you choose." The technician seemed to think about that. Then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess that makes sense." Ethan gave a small smile. "It doesn't have to make sense right away." That night, Ethan walked through the city again. The same streets, the same lights, but everything felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because he had stopped fighting it. He passed over a bridge. The same one. He paused. For a moment, he looked down at the tracks below. Empty now. Quiet. He stepped closer to the railing. Not with fear, but with clarity. I understand now, he said softly. The words weren't for anyone else. Just himself. There's no clean answer. No perfect choice. Only consequences. A pause. And the kind of person you choose to be. He stood there a moment longer. Then turned. And walked away. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed. Its sound carried through the night. Not as a warning. Not as a memory. But as something simple. Neutral. Life moving forward. And for the first time, Ethan moved with it. In the end, it was never about saving 5 or sacrificing 1. It was about carrying